Hey, everyone. All right. First of all, permission. Anyone who wants to get up and move or just leave, totally cool with me. So please remember, if you're feeling a bit stiff, you didn't do the workout at the beginning, amazing workout, go to the next one on Thursday, I think it is. Please just get up and feel free to move. Why is your chair trying to kill you? We got into this because we were interested in the energy people expend during everyday living, and we couldn't understand why it is that, of course, there's tremendous issues regarding food, but what parts of the energy expenditure equation are important in weight gain, obesity, and ultimately in ill health. Now, the reason we were interested in this is because of the data shown here. I feel as though I'm sort of caged off from you guys. So I'm going to be like, they're going to hate me for doing this, but here we go. How about this? All right, poised on the edge. That's me. That's what they say, right on the edge. All right. Over about 150 years, the data on, as obesity has emerged, the data on increasing energy intake and the emergence of obesity are actually not that strong. In fact, in the UK, since 1980, energy intake has declined, whilst obesity rates have doubled. Australia is the only country that's actually documented increased energy intake. But what's important is over that period of time, energy expenditure has progressively declined. Over about 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, and then ultimately, of course, the development of the office and modern factory, and then ultimately the screen-based lives we all live. Now, what's important is this isn't a battle, this isn't a them versus us, activity versus food. No, not at all. The issue is that we have inappropriately high energy intake for inappropriately low energy expenditure, or we burn too few calories for the food we consume. When we think about energy expenditure, all of you are familiar with this. The basal metabolic rate is, of course, something we can't really change. 73% of the variance is affected by your lean body mass. Thermic effect of food is about 11% and doesn't vary that much. It's the energy expenditure of converting intermediary metabolites, converting food to intermediary metabolites, and the remainder is activity. Now, please don't throw things at me. I do not want any death threats at the end of this talk. However, yeah, it would be totally brilliant if the whole of America and the whole of the world were athletes. Totally get it. Yeah, no problem. But that ain't the case. In my clinic, in weight management clinic, about 80%, which is characteristic of the United States, of people do not take regular exercise, do not go to the gym. And so even for those of us who do go to the gym 3 times a week, as you know, it takes about half an hour to get there. You've got to change, and then, of course, the class, whether it's cardio, I'm still sort of sweating from the one this morning. It takes about half an hour. Then actually the biggest barrier to the gym, which actually isn't my problem, is actually redoing one's hair. And then, I'm not entirely sure why you're laughing. But then one has to get back to work. And so for that hour and a half of time that you've allocated to your class, you've only been active for about half an hour, and that's done 3 times a week. So when you average that out, not for you like sports enthusiasts, like totally into it, but regular human beings, that's about 100 calories a day. Now, when you look at energy expenditure measured by doubly labeled water in another sedentary country, this is Great Britain. These are what the data look like. You've got age on the x-axis, total daily energy expenditure by doubly labeled water on the y-axis. Now, what's important to bear in mind is this is basically a sneeze plot. There is massive variability. And the 2,000 to 3,000 calorie per day difference between different people living in a highly developed, sophisticated society such as Great Britain, similarly to the two people of similar size can vary their daily energy expenditure by 2,000 calories a day. Now, if they're similar size, their BMRs are about the same, their basal metabolic rates about the same, thermic effect of food is small. So the only reason 2 people of similar size can vary their total daily energy expenditure by 2,000 calories a day has to be because of either you got a massive sort of gym cohort, but it doesn't happen. So what else can it be? It must be their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Their non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And when you actually look at how the calories from energy expenditure associated with activity are actually differentiated, yeah, the gym goer may actually have 100 calories a day from exercise, but for nearly everybody else, the energy expenditure of activity, conversely inactivity, is from NEET, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. And that's how we got in the game. So how can one person of similar size who doesn't go to the gym avidly burn 2,000 calories a day more than another individual of similar size? How can NEET vary so much? Well, your job is a major driver of that. The lowest NEET we ever measured was actually in Swaziland using doubly leveled water in a student, obviously not at Arizona State University. This person's NEET was 0, and the reason for that was she basically slept all day. On the other extreme, if we took a group of regular folk and moved them into agricultural practice, their NEET, their non-exercise activity thermogenesis associated with work, would be potentially as high as 2,000 calories a day, and I'll show you data to that effect. Many sedentary American office workers have a work-associated NEET of 300 calories a day, basically sort of sitting on their bottoms, getting backwards and forwards to their mode of transport, getting home, pizza, 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 video game, Amazon Prime, click, here it comes, right? Now, our leisure time is also important for our NEET, what we do in our spare time. Not all of us work 20 hours a day, regrettably. And I know everyone here loves their job. That's the trouble with ACSM, right? You guys, we all love working. Anyway, let's say you get home at sort of 5 in the evening. You can choose between remote control, pizza, Amazon, Netflix, versus basically anything else. Whether that's, hang out doing kickboxing with your, not kickboxing with your kids, but sort of, participating in active pursuits, going for a walk with your children, going to the art gallery, which, by the way, has some very good exhibitions in Phoenix at the moment, no conflict of interest. But for those 5 hours, you can either burn basically sort of 0 calories in your evening, or 300, 400, 500 calories in an evening if you want to go for a stroll in the mountains, you want to sort of paint your basement, whatever it may be. And when you start looking at all of these different activities that we do throughout our day, and we can measure all of these, of course, with very sort of quite good quality indirect calorimeters whilst doing different acts. This is a bit of an anachronism. It's a sort of a man doing the washing up. But what you can see is there's sort of chair style versus the NEET way. And if you sort of just convert all of these things, and it can just be things as simple as sort of, on the phone on your sofa with your feet up, as opposed to on the phone wandering around, whatever it may be. But you can see the differences one can create for one's clients or for oneself using one's leisure time to promote activity. So the calorie burn is enormous. And so one person can burn 2,000 calories a day more than another because of either a very, very inactive job plus very inactive leisure time, or a highly active job plus active leisure time. Now, if there's, you thought I was going to go, didn't you? If there's so much variability in the calories you burn because of NEET, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, could NEET be important in the physiology of weight gain? Well, our original experiments involved taking lean individuals and overfeeding them by 1,000 calories a day above their weight maintenance needs. All of this was done on a research setting. So we established that's me. we established how many calories each individual required to keep their body weight absolutely steady, and then overfed them by an extra 1,000 calories a day, and we did that for 8 weeks, so that each individual received in excess of 56,000 extra calories. And we were interested to know is, well, if you give somebody an extra calorie load on top of what they eat of 56,000 calories, what happens to it? Well, this is what's really interesting. First of all, and this was already known, is there's huge variability in fat gain, meaning you can eat in excess of 56,000 calories, and you can be one of those people everyone else absolutely hates, who doesn't gain a pound in body fat. Somehow, you sort of go into overdrive and burn it off, and the way you do that is you increase your NEET, your non-exercise activity thermogenesis. Conversely, you can be a normal human being who eats in excess, whether it's on vacation, stress at work, whatever it may be, and that individual takes those extra calories and deposits them as body fat. And those people who do not switch on their NEET are those people prone to ready weight gain. Now, we wanted to ask the question, well, if NEET is so important in weight gain, I guess I can walk all the way up the corridor. Is that acceptable? Is that acceptable? Okay. All right, totally cool. I'm seeing this as you see it. So we were interested, so if the change in NEAT is so important in fat gain, could NEAT be important in obesity? And in order to understand the calories that people burn in their everyday living, we needed to sort of have an insight, we needed to have a look into how people live their lives. And since most Americans wear underwear, we figured that we could interlace sensors into underwear. Now, these, because I come from Mayo Clinic and Arizona State University, these underwear are shown as overwear. And if you're not sure what the holes are for, then obviously I suppose you don't work in the biological sciences. But into these underwear, here you see, into these underwear, we interlaced a whole series of sensors so that not only could we detect human movement, but we could also detect human posture. So we could know whether people were sitting, standing, moving. We could see what they were doing in bed, rolling, and the other things that Minnesotans get up to at night. Opening the window is what one person told us. I mean, I've never seen anyone open the window and close the window and open the window and close the window so frequently. But we were able to measure the posture. And the point is, these sensors are so sensitive and specific. As we get people to go through a sort of a test series of different movements, you can see how sensitive and specific they are. We measured 21 axes of movement in real time. So we took all of this data, we collated it. And we asked the question again, taking gym goers out of the equation, regular Americans, and what we wanted to know is we went into regular offices and we wanted to go to the cubicles, Cubeland, and we said, what is different about those people who are lean working in cubicles versus those people with obesity working in cubicles? What differentiates them? And this is what the data showed. The data showed that those individuals with obesity, sitting across the cube from somebody who's lean, is an individual who's prone to be seated 2¼ hours a day more than people who are lean. People who are lean and remain lean in modern society, in a modern sedentary environment, are those individuals who somehow find those opportunities to be up and moving 2¼ hours a day more than people with obesity. We then said, oh, well, what is this movement? What's the trick to this movement? How can it be that you've got this NEAT, this non-exercise activity thermogenesis, differentiates the people who are lean from people who are obese? Is there enough calorie burn going on? Remember, already we know that one person can burn 2,000 calories a day more than another person of similar weight. So what we did is we took another group of people and we overfed them as well. And this time they wore magic underwear and got overfed. God, these studies are so much fun. And here's what the data showed. It showed basically the same thing as we did before, right, which is sort of classic good science, right? Keep repeating things until eventually you retire. Anyway, so on the x-axis you see fat gain, on the y-axis you see change in NEAT. But it's not NEAT specifically. What we've done is we've pulled out all of the movement data, because remember, we know when people are sitting, sleeping, and so on and so forth, and what it is change in walking energy expenditure. So what enables an individual to overeat 56,000 extra calories and literally not gain a pound in body fat is because they spontaneously walk 800 calories a day more. They don't go to the gym because we sort of measure these people and track them and all this kind of thing. Those individuals who, when they overfeed, do not activate that NEAT are those individuals prone to weight gain. It's kind of really interesting when you think about it, or at least it's because somebody who's overeating spontaneously moves more on a regression line compared to somebody else. How does that occur? How does that regulate it? And the obvious answer has to be is that this must be somehow computerized in the brain. The brain knows when you're moving, the brain knows when you're sedentary, and the brain ultimately controls what you eat. And so we started doing some experiments in the brain. This is a rat brain. And what you see on the top left there is a rat, and he's not wearing a religious head covering. But what he actually has is a needle. This is Mark 37. He has a needle penetrating the paraventricular nucleus of his hypothalamus. Lana has Mark 37's head between her thumb and finger. These animals tolerate this amazingly well, actually. Medical students don't, but rats do. And she's got a cannula and she's taking it and injecting putative chemicals right into the center of Mark's brain. Now, the reason all the rats were called Mark is it was the name of Lana's ex-boyfriend. Now, unlike the real Mark, who she couldn't contain, she would place the animal in the calorimeter chamber, and we can measure all the movement the animal does. And on top of that, something else she couldn't do with real Mark is we videotape every single thing the animals do. And with the animal's permission, obviously. And so there have now been 4 mediators of NEET identified in the central nervous system, and this is orexin, which is one of them. Orexin is really interesting because it's a sleepy-wakey hormone. When you wake up, orexin wakes you up in the morning, so you can see why we were so interested in it. And the more orexin you inject, this is Koji Kawaki's work, the more orexin you inject, the more NEET the animal has. Now this is really, really cool. So if you take animals inbred for leanness, shown here, and inbred for obesity, shown here, 19 generations of inbreeding experiments that are difficult to do in humans, you see that the animals inbred for obesity have lower NEET than animals inbred for leanness, rather like the human data. But then, as you inject more and more and more orexin into the brains of these animals inbred for obesity and inbred for leanness, the animals inbred for obesity increase so much. The animals inbred for obesity increase this much, twice as much. That's really interesting. So molecule for molecule, for the animals inbred for leanness, they move twice as much more than an animal inbred for obesity. If you like, the brain is far more sensitive in those innately bred to move more compared to those innately bred to have obesity. Now this is true not only in rats. This is a zebrafish. We did amazing we used to do tracking experiments in zebrafish. It's kind of really cool. But this goes right across the animal kingdom. And in fact, NEET responses, and in this case to starvation, are ubiquitous across nature, whether it's actually horses, elephants indeed, wolves, humans. When you calorically restrict, when you take away food, there's a high increase in NEET, and then ultimately with caloric restriction, NEET goes down. But the point I'm making is these chemical signals are not unique to the human or the rat brain, but they go right across nature. This is part of how we're built. So there's a physiological relevance, there's a neurological drive. But how about our environment? Now, to me, what's important about environment is it's not just cubicles. It's not just teachers telling us to sit still. If we were in Boston right now, it's amazingly, there's still snow on the ground, right? It's less likely that you're going to sort of take a 1 or 2 hour walk this afternoon. Here, you've got no excuse. Weather is important. One of the key drivers of NEET, of non-exercise activity thermogenesis, or the converse sedentariness, is poverty. So when I think about ecology, there are multiple factors at play. Now, one of the key questions others and ourselves had is this idea that as humans have urbanized, we used to live in these agricultural environments. We used to have high NEET. Now we all work behind desks. Has it really, what are the data? What are the data that substantiate that? And they're shown here. What we did is we went out to Jamaica. I know, it's all tough. It's all part of a day's work. It's what we do. And we went up to agricultural communities, particularly banana plantations, and we kitted out people working there with those magic underwear. We had one guy arrested, actually. He was thought to be carrying an incendiary device. And his data were excluded for the 1 day he was in prison, but were included for the rest. I'm being absolutely serious. When you measure the NEET in people living in agricultural communities, they ambulate specifically this much. Now, when you take people from Jamaican agricultural communities, the agricultural sort of business scope is collapsing in Jamaica, and they urbanize to Kingston, they halve their ambulation. They halve their ambulation. And people working in factories and offices in Kingston actually have very similar NEET to lean people, weight match, living in the United States. And we've already discussed the impact of obesity. So when you urbanize, shown here is sitting time. When you urbanize from agricultural communities, you double your sitting time. And ultimately, the differential between somebody with obesity working in cube land in America, they sit 3 times as much as people living in agricultural communities. On one hand, it's chilling, because my goodness, we've halved our amount of movement, if not more. But on the other hand, it's really good news. It's really good news, because what a therapeutic opportunity, right? Humans have a capability of moving twice as much or 3 times as much more than they currently do living in modern societies. Isn't that cool? What an amazing, yes. So can you change it? That's exactly right. Can you change it? We're going to talk about that next. Thank you. All right. You're hassling me. No, I like that. Bring it on. Bring it on. I can take it. But this is what we've seen. Now, just one point, just to your point. How is all of this sort of environmental data relevant to the United States? These are data from, count the dots, 3,100 US counties. And there's zip codes. Each dot there is a zip code. And what you see here is obesity rate and sedentariness. These data were gathered with CDC. And of course, there's a beautiful relationship between the zip codes with higher obesity rates and they have higher sedentariness. Now, what's really important about this is zip code. It's not personal behavior, it's where you happen to find yourself living. Okay? That to me is really important, because diabetes and sedentariness track with poverty in obviously a very sort of clean and discernible way. So yeah, of course we have personal choices, but no one chooses to live in poverty. No one chooses to live in a zip code with very high sedentariness. And so you get a sense of the power of these environmental drives. So all of this is interesting, and all of this hopefully is relevant. But then what appeared to be the case as time went on is not only was sedentariness associated with low calories, obviously sort of sitting a lot, but also the health consequences started to become clear. And it's quite obvious when you think about it. If you take people who are moving all day long and scrunch them down into chairs, how crazy is that? Of course it's going to be unhealthy, and indeed it is. So the NIH consensus is shown on this reference here, Feifeld's paper, published here. And what it documents is that there are 34 chronic diseases and conditions associated with excess sitting. And what's interesting to me is that they range from diabetes to hypertension to cardiovascular disease, as you might expect. Breast cancer is dose-dependently associated with sedentariness, of course back problems, and most interestingly also is depression and psychiatric issues. Now, why is that? How can sedentariness be so closely linked with so many health issues, so many health complications? Now, these experiments were sort of super simple, and they go as follows. Regular, healthy individuals were brought onto a research center, and all of these individuals were given breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then they were told to do their normal thing, whether that's going to work at a computer or after dinner sitting at home watching television. On the alternate day, this was actually done 9 times in a sort of some lattice design. It was all done very carefully. On alternate days, individuals were given those same 3 meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, and they were told instead to take a 15-minute walk at 1.5 miles an hour, which is the speed I'm walking at right now, a 15-minute walk at 1.5 miles an hour after each of those 3 meals. And in all the volunteers, we continuously monitored their glucose. This is what happens. The red line shows what happens if you sit down after all of your meals. Exactly. The blue line shows you what happens if you take a 15-minute stroll, just as I'm doing now, after each of those meals. You halve your postprandial glycemic excursion. You halve the change in blood glucose that occurs after all of these 3 meals. Halve it. I mean, when I saw the data, what do you think I do? What's the biggest predictor of type 2 diabetes? Yeah, exactly. The postprandial glycemic excursion. That's exactly right. So of course, just taking this example, you immediately one can immediately appreciate, and now of course there's lots of mechanistic and gene data too, to explain how sedentariness can so profoundly affect one's risk for diabetes. And of course now you think about insulin and insulin-like growth factors that are also cleared by movement, and therefore the link comes to potential malignancies and so on and so forth. And so as soon as I saw this data, you start to realize sitting too much is sort of the channel, the bridge to a whole series of the chronic diseases of modernity. Oh my goodness. You add to that a couple of hamburgers, oi, right? And all of a sudden it starts to make sense. But the concern is greater. So ADA is predicting what, a third of Americans are going to have diabetes. Look at the curve. Here is the x-axis, which is time, and this is millions of people with diabetes in the United States. And what's important about the curve is the shape. There's no flattening off, there's no leveling off. In inner city programs we do here, in underserved 11-year-olds from our Latino communities, 1 in 3 children already have elevated blood pressure. Right? So when you start to realize that a third of Americans already have prediabetes, this is what's going to happen. But it's not just diabetes, it's not just metabolic disease, cancer, back problems, joint problems, osteoporosis, and so on. There are also data that being inactive is associated with feeling blue, depression, but also things as nefarious and as important as happiness, dare I say. What's that? Don't we all have the best jobs? Right? I mean, we are like the chosen 1% in the whole world to get to do something we love to do and to help people get healthy. But people who are stuck on their bottoms all day, who are stuck in chairs all day, have lower creativity, dynamism, mood. And these are now published. Now, the interest in sedentariness and ill health is following the same curve. We're documenting the ill effects of sedentariness, and you can see how the PubMed citations are continuing to increase, just like diabetes is. So what are we going to do about it? How are we going to take this challenge? We know that people can move twice as much as they do. How are we actually going to start to create the society that enables people to be up and moving all day long? Well, despite my dream, we can't actually put the whole of the United States in magic underwear. So we started building, this is now 10, 15 years ago, a whole series of devices that took that same technology. I haven't got time to tell you how the original technologies were built, but I will tell you it involved a lot of glue. But the key breakthrough is actually there's the MEMS accelerometer, the micro electromagnetic machine that goes inside these silicon chips that ultimately drive these devices. Anyway, so we started working on miniaturizing these devices and making them scalable. And then we tech transferred out. And again, I'm sort of quite passionate about building stuff in labs and then sharing it with the world, because otherwise what we do in our lab sort of stays inside the ivory tower. Anyway, so we tech transferred it out to a whole series of different groups. We worked first with Apple Computer. They tech transferred out the data to Nike, and it became Nike Plus system. We started building systems into earpieces because we realized they were going to become ubiquitous. That project failed horribly. We worked with the US Army to build this device, and the idea here was to drop 10,000 units into Rwanda, who were actually seeing this amazing rebuild at the moment. We wanted to chart what happens when you modernize and build new cities. That project failed horribly after 5 years of work because 100 units were delivered to the NIH in Washington. They gave them to 9 to 11-year-old children who managed to destroy every single unit except for one. We found that children were remarkably creative regarding how they destroy technologies. Everything between actually putting these under the back wheels of their dad's car and watching their dad drive over them because they were told to test them. We didn't mean kill them, we had test them. Anyway, so we learned a lot, and ultimately these are the standalone devices, some of them we recognize, and I have no conflicts of interest, by the way. We also realized, this is a trio cell phone, none of you will recognize it, I hope. We also realized it'd be kind of interesting to start people gathering their own data on movement and sharing it with others so it could actually become a competition, and that's what we built here as a sort of a gaming system, and that's obviously my avatar looking very much similar to Arnold Schwarzenegger. I suppose that isn't a good choice these days, but it was at the time. And I could compete against people elsewhere on the cell phone network. So all of these technologies we started to brew. We also found that when you go from portrait to landscape, the chip that measures Earth's gravitational field is a triaxial accelerometer. So we hacked into the iPhone 3 very early on and validated the fact that the chip inside of all of our smartphones can measure human movement beautifully. In fact, these are actually some of the cleanest data we ever got. They're really nice data. And so we realized that you could start building apps to ultimately start to measure activity. And we developed those algorithms, and we also tech transferred those out to multiple other people. But this is what's very powerful. So this was, I can't remember what year it was, 5 or 6 years ago. So we literally, with one student, built this app. We released it without any advertising dollars onto the web. Business Week actually picked it up and voted it one of their top 5 apps. And within 6 months, we had 28,000 users. And in 28,000 users, we were gathering data at 15 hertz, 15 times a second. And all of that data were being collated. And actually what we see here is the data from 28,000 users gathered 15 times a second continuously for months and months on end. And here are the occurrences. And actually, what you see is human movement, when you actually mush it all together, is neat. It's all a very high volume of these very low activity occurrences. But that's not what's interesting. If I'd have gone to my PhD supervisor decades ago and said to Marcia, one day, I'm not going to use surveys, but I'm going to measure daily activity in 28,000 people in real time, 15 times a second, using a validated technology, she would have said, I'm totally, utterly crazy. But all of a sudden, the tools now exist, whether those are Fitbits that have been sold to, 20 million people, Nike Plus was sold to 30 million people, and so on and so forth. We now have and cell phones, we all carry them, we now have the capability of measuring NEET in millions and millions and millions of people in real time. But those aren't the only technologies, however, that are important. This is a simple lanyard that goes around the neck. We've deployed this in every corporation we've worked in. Walking meeting in progress is what's on the thing. There's a little protocol. When somebody's having a walking meeting, you don't interrupt them. And what's important most is that walk and talk meetings are 11 minutes shorter on average than regular meetings, which is a reason alone to deploy this immediately. We've also built little stepping devices that go under the desk so that when the phone goes, you pull out your stepping device and you talk away, and we can actually measure when you're using the stepping device shown here, and different management groups can compete against each other. Of course, the infamous, or now famous, treadmill desk, no conflicts of interest. Again, I actually originally built this out of disused hospital equipment as not a joke. I didn't build it as a joke, that's not true. But to show people what we're trying to get at, this idea that you can move whilst you're at work. And of course, this has now sort of become a little bit of a flagship for some of the programs we're involved in. But as I said, the trick with the technologies is not to think that all technologies involve machines. This is a project I was involved in Democratic Republic of Congo. And all of these individuals, none of whom are nurses, none of whom are physicians, are all carrying certificates. So we built a certification program for community health workers who go out into their communities in obviously some of the poorest parts of the world and deliver very, very specific health programs related to preventing diabetes and obesity. But in other words, part of the technologies are not just devices, but the systems in order to deploy the approaches. And of course, we worked with Armani, and thanks to Matt Damon for coming down to Mayo Clinic. And the idea here was to build a new type of clothing. This is a type of business suit that is lighter than a tracksuit to create a new vibe of dynamic working. It's coming. We also trademarked NEET, and we started realizing that this model of develop, validate, protect, scale is a fantastic way of getting valid approaches out into the marketplace. So we had all these tools and tricks. How could he actually start deploying this as real programs in offices? Well, what we started to do was we started going around offices doing these sort of quite complex breakdowns as to how offices actually function, only focused on movement. And we do this with a whole series of sensors. We have real-time recorders and so on. We then talk to the office about what resources they're willing to deploy in order to create an active workspace. That can be shared desks, that can be walk and talk, it doesn't matter what it is. It can be walking trails. We then bring those in, we work with the manufacturers and we work with the company representatives to bring in all this furniture, and we work with architects as well. We also work with IT and lawyers. We deploy all of these things, and then at the end of the day we also have programs. So that's Desiree, who at the time ran her own company. She's now employed by us at Mayo Clinic. But what Desiree did is we used the train-the-trainer model, and we got 2 minutes per day for every employee, and we would go out and develop ways of getting people up and moving in corporations in various ways using all these various tools, but importantly also using behavioral paradigms. And to prevent the question, we also, of course, work with cafeterias to improve the quality of nutrition. In all of the corporations we work in, we actually bring in and build a laboratory. Because the whole ethos is you can't just keep doing stuff without any data to validate what you're doing. And the more we built laboratories in these different corporations, the better we got at doing the science. And we realized that some of the key variables we're interested in scientifically are not what companies are interested in. And so we started measuring those as well. We work, it's now just over 106 US corporations. At this time it was 71. We work with, and the point I'm trying to make here is we work with some very large corporations, but also very small ones. And we use an a la carte approach. What do you want to do? Here are the data that show what's effective for whom. And what we do is we study, and we publish. And that's the whole idea, because there are lots of companies out there delivering wellness programs, but we're very interested in creating that scientific foundation. And we're quite happy for others to take what we learn works and doesn't work and take it out for themselves. Let me just show you two people. I'm actually just going to show you this one piece of data because I think it's really cool. What we did here, this was published relatively recently in PLOS One. What we did here is measure 3 times a week people's stress levels, and we did that in employees and their managers. And what we show is shown here. This is sort of basically a sort of a score of happiness, of well-being in the workplace. When you deploy these kind of activity programs, you can see multiple groups all show exactly the same thing. I've lost the battery. What happens, oh, there it is. What happens in the first few months of deploying an active program, people's happiness level, they get more stressed out. And of course they get more stressed out. You're fundamentally changing how they work and their working procedures. And they're walking during the day, they're not walking meetings, they're not used to taking notes whilst walking, whatever it may be. And that happens for about 2 to 3 months. But then look what happens. And we're going on now to 60 weeks. We actually published 2 years. People get it. And once they start getting happy, they get happier and happier and happier and happier. And of course, the corporations are seeing a decrease in weight, decrease in diabetes, and the healthcare cost savings. But most importantly, employees are becoming more productive, 10 to 15% more productive, in fact, and happier and healthier too. We took all the programs and again consolidated those, and they became a corporate manual. And of course, there had to be a picture of me at work. So, all well and good, and as many of you know, we were sort of challenged by government to say, oh, you're doing all these things in corporations, how about the kids, how about the kids? We took these same principles, and we had now a lot of tools, we had a lot of approaches, and we had very good trainers. And we went to a group of 10 to 15-year-old children, and we said, could you guys design the school of the future? And they designed this space rather like a Socratic learning space where kids can move throughout the day. And you can see what it is. It's very open plan. They move throughout this space. This is the school in Minnesota. And so, of course, they chose a hockey arena as their classroom. And that's obviously not ice, obviously. And these whiteboards weigh just under 2 pounds. They designed them themselves, and there's a design patent, which is different to a full patent on those. These work tables were designed by the company we were working with at that time, KI, no conflicts of interest. And you can see, and there's a hockey net, kids love to learn in net. They did their own art and everything. We learned a lot from doing this, but what we also did is we measured the effectiveness of the strategy. And what you can see is when you move kids into these very dynamic spaces, they double the amount of NEET, they double the amount of activity they do. Take yourself back to that data from Jamaica, doubling and as you urbanize, you halve. People are meant to be moving twice as much. Give kids the chance, they will double the amount of movement they do. And most importantly, educational scores of these kids improved by 11% compared to matched children from similar schools. Well, you can't go around building new schools everywhere. It's a great idea. Interestingly, in Germany, where we did quite a lot of work. 2 out of 10 new schools are health schools. Because in other words, every country is building schools all the time. So now 2 out of 10, it used to be 1 out of 10. 2 out of 10 are now allocated as health schools. In Sweden, we're doing 1 out of 10 new schools built will be health schools. But you can't go around building all schools, and it's more difficult in the United States for various reasons. So what we did is we built this kit. And the idea of a kit is you can take all the chairs and tables out of a classroom and put this kit in. And this kit costs, no conflict of interest, costs $500. And this kit allows kids to learn, and these are elementary kids to learn, 2 times 2 is 4 while they're sort of doing monkey bars and so on. Yeah, it's really cool. Now, again, how do you validate this? So what we did is we put our laboratory and we built it into a van. And this is a DEXA scanner. We have HIPAA-approved medical record systems and so on and so forth. And we drive the lab to the school. Now, this proves to be very popular with children who view this as sort of experiential science. And so that proves to be a sort of a spin-off from all of this. But here's what the data look like. So if you give kids access to these active classrooms and you measure their activity, this time using actually a very posh measurement system. Again, we co-developed with a Swiss company. It's a research grade, doesn't matter what it is, but it's covered in silicon is the important thing. So when the kids sort of drop it in the bath, let it fall in the toilet, we can ask the kid to get it out for us. Anyway. You can't, anyway, so yeah, enough toilet stories. I'll tell you, when you work with children, you get a lot of toilet stories. Anyway, here's what happens as you start to deploy. This is, remember, just a classroom. We haven't rebuilt the school. What we're doing is giving kids access to this classroom 1 lesson a day. And as time goes on, they become more and more and more active. And what's really interesting, and these data demonstrate how good these sensors are, is that you can see there, that is their 1 lesson a day. But what you also notice is that throughout the day, the kids become more active. So if you give kids 30 minutes exposure, 1 period, actually it's 2 periods, excuse me, it's 48 minutes, it's an hour less 12 minutes. These kids will increase their activity about 30%, and that's just for 1 lesson. So there are very powerful, scalable systems. Other schools have started taking this on. We worked with this school. Originally, we were working with ADHD kids in this school, but the program became so popular, all the kids wanted to have these exercise bicycle things where they can cycle while they're learning. This seems to work quite well. And this is what's really interesting to me. The price points in working in building school furniture are very different to corporate. Suffice it to say, the average cost of a chair and table in a school is $17. And so it's a very difficult space to commercially work in. But this company, again, no conflict of interest, Ergotron, have started to deploy in this space. They're starting to sell in this space. And you can see here, active kids furniture for schools. The other thing, I don't think I've got time to tell you about these kids. When you start working with children, we do a lot of focus groups. We meet with them, find what they want. I mean, to give you a very quick example, one kid explained to me in Iowa, he gets home from the day, he's totally stressed out, hates his new mother, parents remarried. And how does he deal with his stress? He goes into the basement, kills 15 people, and feels much better. Now, we all know what he means, right? We all know what he means. He goes onto the video console and kills 15 people and feels much better. Right. This is the BBC report. Kids are spending more and more time on screens, like we didn't know this. But what I thought was really amusing is that this just over here is his Egg McMuffin. And the question the BBC are asking is, why aren't Egg McMuffins served all day? And I don't know if you saw the press release yesterday from McDonald's. Now they are. Good news. Okay, so schools. Yeah. How about the health? If NEET is so important in 34 different chronic diseases and conditions, how about the healthcare space? We've started working with a whole series of different disease conditions, everything from stress management, cardiovascular disease, and so on and so forth. We work in 23 different health universities on clinical trials and such. And this is we work in heart failure and so on and so forth. But what I want to show you is what's coming next. So you've got Fitbit, you've got these devices. The CAM device is built specifically for this clinical space, and we have programs. But you can take all of that technology now, and you can now condense it and put it in a chip this size. Okay, that's a pencil head. So now we can start to build these micro-miniature technologies. And so in the wearable space, this young girl here is wearing a Band-Aid, and there's the technology right there. Right? And the important point from my perspective is, instead of, it costs about $17, $18 to make something that goes inside a Fitbit or something equivalent to that, a Groove device, it's $34, CAM device, I don't know. The these are going to come out about 37 cents a unit. So now if you say to me, I want to do a diabetes prevention program in Mexico City, I need 1 million units, that's going to cost me about 1 million times a third of a cent, right? $300,000. All of a sudden we can do we can do mass measurements, and not only can we measure activity, we can actually measure continuous glucose using these kind of technologies, but also we can start to deliver therapies. This woman is wearing a patch right here, and through the sensing from the Band-Aid system, we can actually now start to release medication straight into the bloodstream using that cell phone network. Yeah, it's totally cool. Okay, so we've got the healthcare industry, 34 chronic diseases, schools, offices, but how about cities? How about the places we live in? Now, what's really interesting is now there are data coming out. It's very difficult to do prospective studies, redesigning studies, but what we can do, and these are data from the UK, is re-envision cities and actually do the mathematics using big data approaches, algorithms, to see what would happen to cities as you sort of take the cars out and start to ambulate them, start to ambulate city centers. And we just came back from San Francisco, and here's the pitch to San Francisco. In San Francisco, we know is that taking these kind of measures that actually cost the city nothing to do, by ambulating the city, commute time increases 18 minutes. That's true. It saves 2,400 premature lives per year, and saves the city of San Francisco with increased profits in shops, increased walk-by shops, and healthcare cost savings, $34 billion a year. So there are huge opportunities in cityscape redesign as well. We've been working with the mayor of Phoenix, this is Senator Venezuela, building programs in Phoenix, so please join the Phoenix Walks. And so, in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, we sort of walked together through what started off in a sort of a laboratory with animals inside sort of cylinders, and now we get the opportunity to sort of realize that inactivity is such a huge opportunity for health, and we can impact that in so many different ways, whether that's through the programs we deliver, through our clients, through the scalable opportunities in corporations, in schools, even in cities. And we've seen this progression since the Industrial Revolution, and because it's only occurred over 200 years, by definition, it must be reversible. We must be able to do something about it. The team's approach to building scalable solutions, for those of you who are interested in just get out there and do stuff. I mean, and if you're a business person, there's a lot of profit to be made in this space. If you're a health person, there are a lot of people who need your help, And our philosophy is invent, validate, and disseminate. And here's the mantra. Here's the mantra. This is Copeland's quote: "Science proceeds from the assumption that misery is not fated, that because all events are caused, all problems can eventually be solved." Time to get up, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.